Midnight. The chilling cold of death row in Oak Haven State Penitentiary seeped into every fiber of Detective Ava Ramirez. Outside, under the pale yellow glow of a street lamp, a loyal shadow kept an unwavering watch on the grim gray wall. That was Rex, her Belgian Malinois, her canine partner, wearing a specialized vest. A vest, Ava believed, held the key to her very life. Suddenly, a figure approached Rex, a prison guard, his face a blank mask, a gun in his hand. Ava screamed through the intercom, her voice cracking, "Please don't hurt him, Rex." Rex knows the truth. Have you ever felt so desperate that a creature, Opata, unable to speak a word, became your only hope? And where in the world? Are you listening to this story from today? Let me know. And if you believe that truth will ultimately prevail, hit that like button. Detective Ava Ramirez, the first Latina detective in the New Havenwood Police Department to lead the major crimes unit. Picture this, a strong, intelligent woman shattering the invisible ceilings of a profession long dominated by men and white officers. But Ava wasn't just fighting crime. Every day, she had to fight the skeptical glances, the whispers behind her back. She only got that position because of diversity quotas. Does that sound familiar? It's how people dismiss the hard work and talent of minorities. Ava graduated top of her academy class, but that, obstaculos, never seemed to be enough. Imagine constantly being underestimated by male colleagues during physical training, even though you always aced the tests, or being accidentally left out of crucial case emails. Then the jokes about your fiery Latina temper just because you dared to speak up for what's right. That was Ava's daily reality, an unspoken battle, right, Joe Jig, within the very place she served. And then there was Rex. Rex wasn't just any K9. Ava had rescued Rex from a kill shelter, seeing the potential in his intelligent brown eyes. Between them was a profound bond, transcending mere partnership. Rex possessed an extraordinary sense of smell and an almost uncanny intuition, helping Ava crack cases in ways no one expected. People can betray, they can twist truth into lies, but the loyalty of a dog like Rex, it's pure and unshakable. Perhaps that's why Ava trusted Rex more than anyone. The story of Ava and Rex is more than just a case. It's a fight against a dark, insidious power, a fight where the truth seems to be suffocated by power and prejudice. Can Rex bark out the silent voice of justice before it's too late? Make sure you subscribe to join me on this dramatic journey. The case that would unravel Ava's life and drag her into the depths of this conspiracy began, like so many others, with a pre-dawn phone call. The body of a prominent financier, Jonathan Reynolds, had been discovered in his luxurious penthouse apartment, a single gunshot wound to the head. Reynolds wasn't just any wealthy citizen. He was the brother-in-law of New Havenwood's chief of police, Alastair Finch. The pressure to solve this was immense, and it landed squarely on Ava's shoulders. Ava and Rex arrived at the scene before the sun had even kissed the horizon. The penthouse reeked of old money and fresh death. There were no signs of forced entry, which immediately told Ava that Reynolds likely knew his killer. The victim was slumped over his mahogany desk, a scene tragically frozen in time. As Ava meticulously documented every detail, Rex began to act strangely. The highly trained Malinois, usually calm and focused, was agitated, pacing specific areas of the room, his nose working overtime. He kept returning to the victim's computer and a spot near the balcony door. "What is it, boy?" Ava murmured, trusting Rex's instincts more than any piece of high-tech equipment. Her initial examination quickly unearthed troubling inconsistencies. The coroner's preliminary estimate placed the time of death between 10 and 10:30 the previous evening. Yet, Reynolds' computer showed activity, logins, and file access until nearly midnight. Someone had used his computer long after he was dead, and a closer look revealed that several large encrypted files had been wiped clean during that late-night session. Then, there was a faint, partial shoe print near the balcony, almost invisible to the naked eye. It didn't match Reynolds or any of the first responders. The air in that penthouse grew heavy, Ava would later recall. It wasn't just the smell of death. It was the smell of a carefully constructed lie. She was just photographing the shoe print when Captain Marcus Thorne, her direct superior, strode into the room. Thorne was a veteran cop, old school, and a man who had never quite seemed comfortable with Ava's rapid rise through the ranks or her ethnicity. His face was a thundercloud. "Ramirez," he barked, his voice devoid of its usual forced politeness. "You're off this case, effective immediately. Get your dog and get out." Ava was stunned. "Off the case, sir? With all due respect, I've just begun. There are significant inconsistencies here that need to be investigated." She gestured towards the computer, the shoe print. Thorne's jaw tightened. His eyes, cold and hard, avoided hers. "This isn't a request, Detective. It's an order. Straight from the top. Chief Finch himself. You're being removed due to a conflict of interest." "Conflict of interest?" Ava's mind raced. "What conflict? I've never even met Mr. Reynolds personally. I have no connection to him or his businesses." Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "That's not for you to question. Inspector Miller is taking over. Now, go home. That's an order, Ramirez." His tone left no room for argument. It was laced with an unspoken threat, a warning. A conflict of interest, Ava thought, as she reluctantly clipped Rex's leash. Or was it that I was getting too close to something they didn't want found? Was I a threat to their carefully crafted narrative? The way Thorne had looked at her, the almost palpable animosity, it wasn't just about procedure. It felt personal. It felt like a dismissal, not just from a case, but from something much larger. Dejected and confused, Ava led Rex out of the penthouse. The city lights were just beginning to give way to the dawn. But for Ava, a different kind of darkness was starting to descend. That night, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She was at her small apartment, poring over the few notes she'd managed to take at the Reynolds crime scene, trying to piece together the fragments. The official story, being fed to the media, was a robbery gone wrong, but Ava knew better. The scene was too clean, too staged. She was just about to call her trusted colleague, Detective Chloe Davis, hoping Chloe might have heard something through the grapevine, when Rex, who had been dozing at her feet, suddenly sprang up, a low, menacing growl rumbling in his chest. His hackles were raised, his eyes fixed on the front door. Before Ava could react, the door splintered inwards with explosive force. A dozen heavily armed SWAT officers poured into her living room, their weapons trained on her. "Ava Ramirez, you are under arrest for the murder of Jonathan Reynolds." The voice was chillingly familiar. It was Captain Thorne, standing in the doorway, a grimly triumphant look on his face. Ava didn't resist. She knew better than to make any sudden moves when faced with a tactical team. But that didn't stop the brutality. She was slammed against the wall, her cheekbones scraping against the rough plaster, so hard she tasted blood as they cuffed her. Thorne leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear, his voice, a venomous whisper, dropped a racial slur. That made her stomach clench. Then he hissed, "You always thought you were so much better than everyone else, didn't you, you little... Well, let's see you talk your way out of this one." Rex, loyal to the end, lunged at the officers, trying to protect Ava. He was met with a swift, brutal blow from a baton, and then a muzzle was roughly strapped over his snout by an officer who seemed to take a sadistic pleasure in it. An officer Ava vaguely recognized. An officer, with a small, almost hidden tattoo of a white supremacist symbol peeking out from under his sleeve. When the mask drops, Ava thought, as they dragged her away, you see the true face of power and prejudice. Professionalism is just a convenient disguise. The so-called thin blue line had just redrawn itself, and Ava was now firmly on the outside. The silence from her colleagues, the ones who had once clapped her on the back, shared coffee with her, praised her skills, was deafening. It was the silence of fear, of complicity, of a system protecting its own, no matter the cost. And the cost, it seemed, was Ava Ramirez. The cold, sterile interrogation room at the New Havenwood Police Department felt like a tomb. Ava sat there, bruised, bewildered, but her detective's mind was already working, trying to cut through the fog of disbelief. Inspector Miller, the officer who had taken over the Reynolds case, entered the room. He was a man known for his smug demeanor and his barely concealed disdain for female officers, especially women of color. He laid out the evidence against Ava with a sickening, self-satisfied smirk. First, Miller began, his voice dripping with false authority. The ballistics report, the murder weapon, matches your service pistol, Detective Ramirez, the one you conveniently reported stolen just last week. He slid a photo across the table. Ava's gun. Ava's heart sank. Her gun had been stolen from her locked car. A few days prior, she'd filed a report immediately, but now it was being twisted into something sinister. That's impossible, she stated, her voice steady despite the tremor inside. My weapon was stolen. I filed a report. Miller just chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, we have your report, Detective. Very convenient timing, wouldn't you say? He then produced another evidence bag. Second, we found your DNA under Mr. Reynolds's fingernails. Looks like he put up quite a struggle before you silenced him. My DNA? Ava was reeling. How? She'd never touched Reynolds, never been in a struggle with him. This had to be a plant, a fabrication. But how could they do it so quickly, so effectively? Third, Miller continued, clearly enjoying Ava's distress. Security footage from Reynolds's building. It shows a woman, matching your height, your build, your distinctive way of walking, entering the building, around the estimated time of death, and leaving shortly after. He pushed another grainy photo towards her, a silhouetted figure. That could have been anyone, but in the context of the other evidence, it was damning. And finally, Detective, Miller said, leaning forward, his eyes glinting with malice. The pièce de résistance, text messages between you and Mr. Reynolds. They paint a rather interesting picture, a personal relationship, gone sour, arguments, threats. It seems you were quite upset about some of his business dealings that you felt were unethical. Perhaps you tried to blackmail him, and when that failed, he let the insinuation hang in the air. Ava stared at the printed-out messages. In stunned disbelief, they were complete fabrications, sophisticated fakes. But they looked horribly real. These messages are forged, she insisted, her voice rising. I have never, ever, had a conversation with Jonathan Reynolds in my life, let alone texted him. Miller leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. Your phone records, and Mr. Reynolds's, say otherwise, Detective, or should I say, ex-Detective Ramirez. The setup was meticulous, terrifyingly thorough. This wasn't just a few rogue cops trying to frame her. This was a well-orchestrated conspiracy involving significant resources and inside knowledge. Someone, or some group, with immense power, wanted Ava Ramirez, not just discredited, but destroyed. This isn't a sloppy frame-up, Ava realized with a sickening lurch. This is a professional hit, designed to leave no doubt. They're not just trying to silence me, they're trying to make an example out of me. Her request for a lawyer was met with delays and more questioning. When she was finally assigned a public defender, Arthur Finchley, her hopes plummeted further. Finchley was a disheveled, world-weary man who seemed more interested in plea bargains than in fighting for an innocent client. He glanced perfunctorily at the evidence file, then advised Ava, in a hushed, almost defeated tone, "Detective Ramirez, the evidence against you is overwhelming. My advice? Plead guilty. To a lesser charge. Manslaughter, perhaps. We might be able to get the death penalty off the table." "Plead guilty?" Ava was aghast. "Mr. Finchley, I am innocent. This is a setup. The evidence is fabricated." Finchley sighed, a tired, old sound. He avoided her gaze. "Look, Detective, I've been doing this a long time. Sometimes the system just chews people up. And right now, it has its teeth sunk deep into you." He paused, then lowered his voice even further. "And frankly, there are certain powerful interests who want this case closed, quickly and quietly. No one is going to risk their career, or worse, by digging too deep into this. Take the deal. It's your best shot. Many people assume," Ava would reflect later, "that if you're innocent, the system will protect you, that your court-appointed lawyer will be your knight in shining armor. But sometimes, that lawyer is just another cog in a broken machine. Or worse, they're intimidated by forces you can't even see, forces that have already decided your fate." Ava demanded a new lawyer. Finchley just gave a mirthless laugh. "Good luck with that, Detective. This case is radioactive. No one in their right mind will touch it." His words hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of the powerful, unseen enemy she was up against. Meanwhile, another cruel blow was delivered. A directive, signed by none other than Captain Thorne, had been issued to the New Havenwood Animal Control. Rex, her loyal canine partner, was to be euthanized within 48 hours. The official reason? Aggressive behavior, displayed during the arrest of Detective Ramirez, posing a danger to public safety. They weren't just trying to kill me, Ava understood with a cold dread. They wanted to erase every trace, every witness, even a dog. Rex knew things. Rex had seen things at that crime scene. He was a loose end they needed to tie up. And then, the media circus began. Chief of Police Alistair Finch, the victim's brother-in-law, held a press conference. His face, a mask of feigned sorrow and grave disappointment. "It is with a heavy heart," Finch intoned, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "that I must address the betrayal by one of our own, Detective Ava Ramirez, who was once a symbol of our department's commitment to diversity, has, it appears, succumbed to her own personal demons." He then went on to speak of concerns about Detective Ramirez's temperament and her sometimes volatile nature. It was a thinly veiled, racially charged insinuation, playing into harmful stereotypes about Latina women, being overly emotional and untrustworthy. A story, repeated often enough, Ava knew, becomes the truth in the public's mind, no matter how false it is. That's the terrifying power of the media when it's manipulated. They were not just building a legal case against me, they were assassinating my character, poisoning the well, before I even had a chance to speak. The carefully woven net of deceit was tightening around her, and the walls were closing in, while Ava was trapped in the belly of the beast, fighting a losing battle against a system designed to crush her. A few small, improbable lights began to flicker in the overwhelming darkness. Hope, it often does, came from the most unexpected of places. Leo Maxwell was a quiet man. He'd worked at the New Havenwood City Animal Control Center for 15 years, a job that paid little and offered even less glory, but one he did with a deep, unwavering compassion for the animals in his care. He'd seen his share of sad cases, of dogs deemed aggressive or unmanageable. But when Rex Ava Ramirez's K9 partner arrived with a rushed, irregularly signed euthanasia order, scheduled for the very next morning, something felt profoundly wrong to Leo. The incident report described Rex as vicious, out of control during Ava's arrest, but the dog Leo saw was anything but. Rex sat silently in his kennel, his intelligent brown eyes following Leo's movements, not with fear or anger, but with a kind of calculated assessment. There was a dignity about him, a quiet strength, that belied the damning report and the order itself, signed off by Captain Thorne, instead of a judge or a senior animal control supervisor. For such an immediate, high-profile case, stank of procedural shortcuts and undue influence. Leo knew he could lose his job, he'd later confide, or worse, given who was involved. But his conscience, it just wouldn't let him stand by. He'd seen too many good dogs, put down for bad reasons. This felt like one of those times, only much, much bigger. That night, instead of processing the euthanasia paperwork, Leo Maxwell made a decision that would change everything. He carefully sedated Rex, just enough to keep him calm, falsified the kennel records to show the German Shepherd had been put down as scheduled, and then, under the cover of darkness, he smuggled Rex out of the Animal Control Center as he was removing Rex's K9 vest for cleaning before, theoretically, disposing of it. His fingers brushed against a small, concealed pocket, a hidden compartment Ava must have sewn in herself. Inside, nestled securely, was a tiny, unmarked USB flash drive. A spark, ignited in the desperate night, Leo felt. A tiny flicker, but a spark nonetheless. Once Rex was safely at Leo's small apartment and had recovered from the mild sedative, he became restless, agitated. He paced, whined softly, and then began to pull insistently at Leo's pant leg, nudging him towards the door. It was clear. Rex wanted to go somewhere, with a specific purpose, trusting the dog's uncanny intelligence. Leo clipped on a leash and let Rex lead the way. Through the sleeping city streets they went, Rex navigating with an almost eerie certainty. After nearly a mile, the dog stopped in front of an old, slightly run-down apartment building. In a working-class neighborhood, he began to scratch insistently at one particular door. On the second floor, the door opened a crack, revealing a woman in her late 70s, her face etched with the lines of a long, hard life. Her expression shifted from confusion to utter shock as she saw the magnificent German Shepherd standing on her doorstep. "Rex!" Isabella Torres gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She quickly ushered both dog and man inside, her eyes darting nervously, up and down the hallway, before she threw several deadbolts. "You must be either very brave or very foolish, young man," she said to Leo. Once they were settled in her modest but spotlessly clean living room, Eleanor introduced herself as Ava Ramirez's former neighbor. Before the detective had moved to a small house across town, a couple of years back, Rex, she explained, had occasionally stayed with her when Ava worked long, overnight shifts, forging a bond between the old woman and the intelligent K9. Then, Isabella Torres dropped a bombshell. She clutched a worn handkerchief in her arthritic hands, Leo remembered, her voice trembling, but firm. The night before Ava's arrest, the night Jonathan Reynolds was murdered, Isabella had been unable to sleep. From her window, which overlooked the back of Ava's old house, which had been vacant since Ava moved, she'd seen something highly suspicious. Two men, in plain clothes, acting very furtively, had spent hours going in and out of Ava's property, long before any official police raid or search warrant could have been issued. "I thought about calling the police," Isabella explained, "but something about them, the way they moved, So professional, so careful to avoid being seen. It didn't feel right. It felt like they were planting something, not looking for something. Crucially, Isabella Torres had taken a few blurry photos with her old smartphone. Photos that, while not crystal clear, were clear enough to show faces and to prove that someone had been in Ava's house, illicitly, hours before the official narrative even began. Sometimes, Leo thought, as he looked at the photos on Isabella's phone, the most ordinary people hold the most extraordinary pieces of the puzzle. Courage doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a badge. Meanwhile, inside the impenetrable walls of the New Havenwood Police Department, another small seed of doubt was taking root. Officer Samira Khan was a recent academy graduate, a bright, idealistic young woman of South Asian descent. Ava Ramirez had been her mentor, her inspiration. During a community outreach program when Samira was still in high school, it was Ava's encouragement that had convinced Samira she could overcome the barriers facing women of color in law enforcement, though her current role was mostly administrative, giving her limited authority. It also gave her almost unlimited access to departmental communications and case files while filing reports related to the the Reynolds murder. Samira noticed discrepancies, glaring inconsistencies in the timestamps between the evidence logs and the official officer statements. Things just didn't add up. But what truly set her alarm bells ringing was a conversation she accidentally overheard. Captain Thorne was in a closed-door meeting, his voice tight and furious, though muffled. Samira managed to catch a few chilling phrases. "Finch assures me this will be handled cleanly if Ramirez's dog is still missing, and that damn USB surfaces the whole operation could be compromised. Find that animal and destroy it before anything on that vest becomes a problem." The USB on the vest, the words echoed. In Samira's mind, it confirmed her growing suspicion that something dark and rotten was coiling around Ava's case. Listening to your gut, Samira believed, that little voice that whispers when something's off. Sometimes, that's the truest compass you have. She could have ignored it, dismissed it as office politics, but Ava had taught her better, and so, the network began to weave itself. A compassionate animal control worker, an observant elderly neighbor, a courageous rookie cop, seemingly disconnected, yet bound by a shared sense of unease, and a dawning, terrifying understanding. They were small, almost invisible, against the Goliath they were facing, but they had something the enemy didn't count on. The truth, however fragmented, was on their side. And they had Rex, a silent, four-legged warrior, whose instincts were proving to be more reliable than any human detective. The fight for Ava Ramirez's life, and for justice, had truly begun. In the shadows, the USB drive, that tiny piece of technology Leo Maxwell had discovered in Rex's vest, became the focal point for this nascent, unlikely alliance, but it was password protected, heavily encrypted, clearly. Ava had anticipated that her findings might fall into the wrong hands. Leo and Isabella knew they needed someone with serious technical skills. Samira Khan, racking her brain for anyone Ava trusted implicitly, and who had the necessary expertise, remembered Ethan Chen. Ethan was a brilliant cybercrimes analyst, a former partner of Ava's who had recently transferred to a specialized tech unit. He was known for his quiet intensity and his unwavering loyalty to those he respected. Ava was high on that list. Samira, using a burner phone and coded language, managed to arrange a discreet meeting. They chose a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop frequented by city workers, rather than cops, a place where they were less likely to be noticed. Ethan arrived, cautious, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He was initially skeptical when Leo and Isabella, two strangers, approached him with a wild story about a K9, a USB drive, and a detective on death row. But then, Leo produced the flash drive, and Isabella showed him the blurry photos of the men trespassing at Ava's house, the mention of Rex, and Ava's desperate situation, chipped away at Ethan's professional reserve. He knew Ava. He knew her integrity, her meticulousness, the official story about her suddenly snapping and murdering Jonathan Reynolds had never sat right with him. Ava Ramirez is no killer, Ethan stated flatly, his voice low but firm. And she doesn't make mistakes. If she was investigating something, it was serious, and if she hid this USB, it means she found something explosive. The makeshift headquarters for their desperate operation became the cluttered, oil-stained garage of Ethan's older brother, a mechanic. It was a place Ethan knew was free from electronic surveillance, a dead zone where they could work without prying eyes or ears for hours. Ethan worked tirelessly, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his personal, highly customized laptop, running sophisticated decryption algorithms he'd developed himself. Ava knew that if this fell into police hands, they'd use standard department software to try and crack it, Ethan explained, as lines of code scrolled across his screen. She was counting on them, underestimating her, and she was counting on someone like me to use unconventional methods. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a small window popped up on Ethan's screen. Decryption complete. The contents of the USB drive spilled onto the monitor, and the air in the garage grew thick with a chilling, horrifying revelation. It wasn't just a random collection of files. It was a meticulously organized, deeply damning investigation, compiled by Ava herself, over many months. It was codenamed Project Aurora. The core of Project Aurora detailed a systematic predatory scheme by a shadowy consortium of shell corporations, all leading back to the massive, seemingly legitimate, Vanguard development, the company previously headed by the murdered Jonathan Reynolds. Their target? Impoverished, predominantly minority neighborhoods across New Havenwood. The methods were insidious and varied. First came the financial squeeze. Banks, suddenly and inexplicably, began denying small business loans and mortgages in these targeted areas. Property taxes for long-term residents mysteriously skyrocketed, pushing families to the brink of foreclosure. Then came the harassment, anonymous threats, vandalism, sudden unwarranted code enforcement raids on homes and small businesses, and for those who still refused to sell their properties for a fraction of their true worth, came the more direct, brutal tactics, fabricated arrests for minor, often non-existent offenses, designed to drain their meager savings on legal fees and break their will to resist. Ava's files were filled with evidence, recorded conversations with terrified residents, surveillance photos of shady investors making threats, financial documents tracing a complex web of money laundering from Vanguard development through offshore accounts and back into the pockets of complicit city officials. And then there was the blacklist, a chillingly precise list of community leaders, activists, and ordinary homeowners who had dared to stand up to Vanguard. Almost every single person on that list had subsequently faced trumped-up charges, financial ruin, or worse. This isn't just corporate greed, Ethan said, his voice tight with anger, as he scrolled through the horrifying details. This is ethnic cleansing by economic warfare. They're not just stealing land, they're destroying communities, erasing history, and they're using the full weight of the city's bureaucracy and even parts of the police department to do it. They call it urban renewal, progress. But it's progress, built on the backs of the most vulnerable. But Ava's investigation hadn't stopped there. Buried deeper within the encrypted files was a more terrifying discovery, an organizational chart for a clandestine group calling themselves the Phoenix Council. At the very top was a name that made Leo, Isabella, and Ethan simultaneously gasp. Police Chief Alastair Finch, the key operatives, listed directly below him, were Captain Marcus Thorne, District Attorney Victor Sterling, and Judge Harold Crane, the very judge who was set to preside over Ava's trial. The chart also detailed a network of paid informants within the New Havenwood Police Department, officers who provided intelligence and carried out the dirty work for the council. These kinds of shadow organizations, Ethan mused, his face grim. They don't just exist in spy novels, they are real. They operate in the daylight, cloaked in legitimacy, using the law as both a shield and a sword. They control the narrative, they control the resources, and they eliminate anyone who threatens to expose them, as if on cue. Rex, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during Ethan's intense work, suddenly got up and nudged Ethan's hand. He then walked over to a printed map of New Havenwood that Ava had included in her files, a map detailing the properties targeted by Project Aurora. Rex placed his paw directly on an area marked as a recently condemned industrial warehouse district, a property also owned by Vanguard Development and slated for demolition. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked. "You think Ava found something there?" Following Rex's lead and a hunch, Ethan and Leo, disguised as utility workers, made a perilous trip to the derelict warehouse. Inside, amidst the dust and decay, Rex led them to a hidden, soundproofed room. It was a secret surveillance hub, sophisticated listening devices, video monitors, tracking the movements and conversations of community activists, and detailed, three-dimensional maps, plotting out the entire Project Aurora land grab. In a dusty, forgotten desk drawer, they found more documents, internal memos from Vanguard Development, outlining the next phase of Project Aurora, a phase that involved invoking eminent domain on an unprecedented scale under the guise of a citywide emergency revitalization plan. Ava wasn't just investigating a murder, Leo said softly, as the true monstrous scale of the conspiracy began to dawn on him. She stumbled into the viper's nest, and they knew she had the evidence to burn the whole thing to the ground. The USB drive was no longer just a clue. It was a declaration of war from a detective who, even from the shadow of death row, was still fighting, while Ethan, Leo, and Isabella were unearthing the horrifying extent of the Phoenix Council's operations. Ava Ramirez was fighting her own desperate battle for survival. Inside the cold, unforgiving walls of the New Havenwood County Jail, the moment she was transferred from the city holding cell, it became clear that her life was in constant danger. Her reputation as a cop, even a dirty one in their eyes, made her an immediate target for other inmates, and the guards seemed to turn a blind eye, or worse, subtly facilitate the threats against her. One evening, in the dimly lit, perpetually damp shower block, 3 inmates cornered her. One of them, a hulking woman with dead eyes and a sharpened toothbrush clutched in her fist, sneered. "Heard someone paid good money to make sure you don't make it to trial." Detective? Ava wasn't a passive victim, she'd later recount, with a steely resolve. Her police training, her years on the street, kicked in. She knew how to read threats, how to de-escalate, and when necessary, how to fight. A brutal, short-lived scuffle ensued. Ava managed to disarm the attacker and hold her own, until guards, finally, and suspiciously slowly, intervened. She escaped with a deep gash on her arm and a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. They wanted her silenced, one way or another, but even in that hostile environment, Ava's detective instincts remained sharp. She began to observe, to listen, to piece together the subtle dynamics of prison life. She noticed other women, who seemed to be facing eerily similar and equally unjust circumstances. There was Martha, Mama Diaz, a respected community activist, a grandmotherly figure with a fire in her belly, who had fiercely opposed the demolition of a beloved community center in her predominantly African-American neighborhood. A center that stood squarely in the path of a proposed luxury condo development by a Vanguard subsidiary. Mama Diaz had suddenly been arrested on trumped-up drug possession charges, despite having no history whatsoever of drug use. "They planted it on me, child," Mama Diaz whispered to Ava during a brief, furtive conversation in the laundry room. "Right after I told that smarmy Vanguard lawyer I'd chain myself to the bulldozers before I let them tear down our children's future." Then there was David Lee, a quiet, hard-working owner of a small, family-run grocery store in a historic Asian district. His store had been in his family for 3 generations, an anchor of the community. Vanguard Development wanted his land for a high-rise office tower. When David repeatedly refused their lowball offers, he was suddenly slapped with an aggressive and highly publicized tax evasion audit. His assets were frozen, his reputation ruined, and he was eventually arrested. "They said I owed hundreds of thousands," David told Ava, his voice barely a whisper. "I always paid my taxes, always. But they came with so many papers, so many lawyers. I didn't understand. I lost everything." And Linda Carter, a retired schoolteacher, a white woman who had become an unlikely but vocal advocate for the minority families being displaced in her gentrifying neighborhood. She had organized protests, written letters to the editor, and generally made herself a thorn in the side of the developers. Linda found herself ensnared in a bizarre, minor fraud case involving a charity she volunteered for. A case that appeared out of thin air and was prosecuted with unusual zeal. The most significant connection Ava made was with Anna Reed, a different Anna Reed from the FBI agent her team was trying to contact outside. This Anna was a sharp-witted, former civil rights attorney serving time for witness tampering, a charge she vehemently denied. "I was representing a group of tenants against a Vanguard subsidiary that was trying to illegally evict them," Anna explained to Ava during a closely watched but still possible conversation in the prison library. "We were actually making headway, getting some media attention. Then suddenly, this star witness for Vanguard recants his testimony and claims I threatened him. It was a complete fabrication designed to discredit me and derail the case. Sound familiar, detective?" It wasn't just isolated incidents of corruption, Ava realized, as she pieced together these stories. This was a pattern, a systemic, calculated, and ruthless campaign to neutralize any opposition to the Phoenix Council's agenda. They were using the entire legal system, from arrests to prosecution to incarceration, as a weapon against innocent people. And I was just the latest, highest-profile target. These women became Ava's unlikely allies, sharing information, warnings, and a grim, unspoken understanding of the forces arrayed against them. Meanwhile, Ava's trial was a masterclass in judicial manipulation. The date had been fast-tracked with unprecedented speed. "Justice delayed is justice denied," Judge Harold Crane had intoned piously, while denying every request from Ava's lawyer, Arthur Finchley, for more time to prepare. But everyone knew this was about railroading Ava before her allies on the outside could find anything substantial. The jury selection was a farce. "They say, a jury of your peers," Ava mused bitterly. But how is it that in a city as diverse as New Havenwood, my jury was entirely white, with a disproportionate number of individuals who had financial ties, however distant, to businesses connected to Vanguard Development or its known associates? Finchley made a few token objections, which Judge Crane dismissed with barely concealed impatience. The prosecution's case, presented by the overtly ambitious and morally bankrupt District Attorney Victor Sterling, was a tapestry of lies, woven with threads of half-truths and outright fabrications. Officers who had once praised Ava's skills now testified that she was reckless, insubordinate, and had a history of bending the rules. Their original incident reports, which Samira Khan had managed to copy before fleeing, directly contradicted their sworn testimony. But Finchley, either through incompetence or fear, failed to effectively cross-examine them or highlight these glaring discrepancies. The forensic experts presented their findings with an air of unshakable certainty. The DNA, the ballistics, the manipulated security footage, all painted a picture of Ava's guilt. Finchley's attempts to challenge their methodology were weak and easily shut down by Sterling's aggressive objections and Judge Crane's biased rulings. Arthur Finchley, it became painfully clear, was not just out of his depth. He was actively sabotaging Ava's defense. During one brief private consultation, his hands trembled as he confessed, "Ava, they threatened my family, my daughter. They know where she goes to school. I can't. I'm sorry." The words were a death knell to any hope Ava had of a fair trial. It was during the testimony of a forensic technician who was presenting a demonstrably false analysis of gunshot residue found on Ava's jacket, a jacket that had been in police custody since her arrest, that Ava finally snapped. She couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, her voice ringing out, clear and defiant, in the stunned courtroom. "Your Honor, I must object. This entire proceeding is a sham. The evidence being presented has been tampered with, altered from the original reports. My constitutional right to effective counsel is being violated by Mr. Finchley's deliberate failure to challenge this perjured testimony." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Crane's face turned a mottled purple. He slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Detective Ramirez, you are in contempt of this court. One more outburst like that, and I will have you removed from your own trial." He then instructed the jury to disregard Ava's hysterical and unfounded accusations. But Ava had seen it. A flicker of doubt in the eyes of a few jurors, a questioning glance exchanged between two of them. The seeds, however small, had been planted that night as she was being escorted back to her cell, her heart heavy with the near certainty of a guilty verdict. Ava glanced out a small, barred window overlooking a dimly lit service alley, and there, for just a fleeting moment, she saw him, Rex, standing silently under a flickering streetlight, his intelligent eyes fixed on her window. He let out a single, soft whine, a sound that carried more meaning than 1,000 words. Then, as a guard approached, he melted back into the shadows. It was a brief, almost dreamlike encounter. But it was enough. It was a message, a confirmation. Someone was still out there, fighting for her. Her loyal partner, her four-legged warrior, had not forgotten her. And that tiny spark of hope, which had been nearly extinguished by the crushing weight of injustice, flickered once more, back to life. The fight was far from over. "They think they've broken me," Ava vowed silently, as she stared out into the darkness where Rex had been. "They think they've won. They have no idea what's coming." The Phoenix Council, accustomed to operating with impunity, moving chess pieces across the board of New Haven wood with arrogant precision, began to feel the first faint tremors of an earthquake. They hadn't anticipated. Their carefully orchestrated takedown of Ava Ramirez was supposed to be swift, clean, and absolute. But the persistence of her unlikely allies, and the almost supernatural interventions of her canine partner, Rex, were starting to unravel their meticulously woven tapestry of lies. The pressure mounted. Captain Thorne, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his paranoia, escalated his efforts to neutralize the threats. The shoot-on-sight order for Rex was reiterated with chilling emphasis across all police channels. "That dog is not just an animal," Thorne had been overheard ranting to a subordinate. "It's a goddamn liability. It knows too much. It saw too much. I want it found, and I want it permanently silenced. Is that clear?" The gala, the lavish charity event hosted by Vanguard Development, was fast approaching. It was meant to be a victory celebration for the Phoenix Council, a public display of their untouchable power and influence. Ethan Chen, Leo Maxwell, and Isabella Torres knew this was their last, best chance to expose the council, to gather irrefutable evidence of their collusion. But their ranks had been thinned. Daniel Washington, the community activist who had bravely agreed to try and infiltrate the event, had been neutralized, arrested on yet another set of trumped-up charges, his vital intelligence seemingly lost. "It's like playing whack-a-mole with a hydra," Ethan muttered, his face pale with exhaustion and frustration, as they huddled in his brother's garage, now more a war room than a repair shop. "We take out one threat, and two more pop up. They have eyes and ears everywhere." But Rex, once again, proved to be their ace in the hole. When Daniel Washington was apprehended, and his apartment presumably searched and stripped clean by Thorne's operatives, Rex, who had an uncanny ability to sense when evidence was in jeopardy, led Ethan and Leo on a frantic, late-night detour to a small, community garden that Daniel often tended. There, hidden beneath a loose flagstone, in a waterproof container, was a backup set of Daniel's research, including, crucially, several audio recordings of hushed, incriminating conversations between lower-level Phoenix Council members. The recordings, though not naming the top brass directly, clearly outlined the council's methods for discrediting and eliminating obstacles to Project Aurora. "Good boy, Rex, you magnificent, brilliant boy," Leo whispered, ruffling the dog's fur, a rare smile gracing his weary face. Meanwhile, Ava, from within the suffocating confines of Oakhaven State Penitentiary, managed to send out one last, desperate, cryptic message. Anna Reed, the incarcerated former lawyer, with her network of prison contacts, orchestrated a minor diversion in the administrative wing, a carefully timed inmate dispute. This chaos provided Ava with a precious, unsupervised 30-second window to speak to Willow Hayes, the young, sympathetic correctional officer, whose family had also been victimized by Vanguard's predatory tactics. Ava's words were urgent, barely a whisper. "Willow, get a message to Ethan Chen. Tell him Finch's cabin, the old hunting ledger, and the floor safe in the chief's office. There's something there. Something he wouldn't want anyone to find." Ava had pieced these fragments together from snatches of overheard conversations during her arrest and transport. A name dropped here, a boastful comment there. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass, based on intuition and desperation, but it was all she had left. The media, largely controlled or influenced by Vanguard's vast network of corporate ownership, continued its relentless character assassination of Ava. She was portrayed as a disgruntled, violent cop, a ticking time bomb, who had finally exploded. Chief Finch made frequent, somber television appearances, lamenting the tragic downfall of a once promising officer, and subtly reinforcing racist and sexist stereotypes about Ava's instability. Have you ever felt like the entire world is determined to believe a lie about you? Ava would later say, no matter what you do, no matter what the truth is, the narrative has already been written, and you are just a character in their twisted play. Then, just days before Ava's scheduled execution, a bizarre and seemingly unrelated event threw a wrench into the Phoenix Council's well-oiled machine. An anonymous bomb threat was called into the New Havenwood courthouse, forcing a chaotic emergency evacuation. The timing was suspicious. It occurred just as the jury in another unrelated high-profile corruption trial, one that Judge Crane was also presiding over and seemed poised to dismiss, was about to deliver its verdict. The ensuing pandemonium created a window of opportunity, a brief crack in the council's ironclad control. During the evacuation, as panicked officials and court staff scrambled for safety, Ethan Chen, using his technical wizardry and a cloned security badge he'd painstakingly created, managed to slip into Chief Finch's now empty office. He knew it was an incredible risk. If caught, he'd be joining Ava on death row, but Ava's cryptic message about the floor safe gnawed at him, guided by a hunch and a sophisticated electromagnetic scanner he'd borrowed from his department. Ethan located a small, cleverly concealed floor safe hidden beneath Finch's oversized mahogany desk. The lock was complex, state-of-the-art, but Ethan was a master of his craft. Sweat dripped from his brow as he worked, the seconds ticking by like hammer blows. Finally, with a soft click, the heavy steel door swung open. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of illicit cash and a few compromising photographs of other city officials, was a slim, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't the hunting ledger Ava had mentioned. This was something far more damning. It was Chief Alistair Finch's personal handwritten journal, a detailed, almost boastful account of the Phoenix Council's activities, their methods, their members, and their long-term plans for New Havenwood. And there, in Finch's own elegant script, was the most chilling entry of all, dated 6 months prior to Jonathan Reynolds' murder. Ramirez is becoming a significant liability. Her investigation into the Aurora acquisitions is dangerously close to exposing the entire network. Standard discrediting tactics will not suffice. She is too tenacious, too well respected by the rank and file who don't know better. The council has approved a permanent solution. Reynolds, with his gambling debts and his increasingly erratic behavior, will provide the perfect, albeit unwitting, catalyst. We will frame Ramirez for his murder and remove her from the equation. Permanently. It is regrettable, but necessary for the greater good of the project. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just corruption. This was premeditated, cold-blooded murder, orchestrated at the highest levels of city government. He quickly photographed every page of the journal with a micro camera, then, just as quickly, replaced the ledger and relocked the safe. He slipped out of the chief's office, moments before security began to sweep the building. The bomb threat, it turned out, was a hoax, a very convenient, very timely hoax. Perhaps even the Phoenix Council sometimes made mistakes, or perhaps there were other, unseen forces at play, forces that were starting to push back against the darkness. The evidence was now overwhelming. The noose was tightening, but not around Ava Ramirez. It was tightening around the necks of her accusers. The clock was still ticking down to Ava's execution, but the game had just dramatically and irrevocably changed. The jury's verdict, when it came, was a brutal, foregone conclusion: guilty on all counts. Ava Ramirez, her face an unreadable mask, listened as Judge Harold Crane, his voice devoid of any human emotion, read the sentence. Death by lethal injection. The execution date was set with an almost obscene haste, a mere 48 hours away. 48 hours. The words echoed in the stunned courtroom, and in the hearts of Ava's small, desperate band of allies. It was a blatant, contemptuous disregard for due process, for the appeals that were a condemned prisoner's right. The Phoenix Council was not just trying to silence Ava. They were sprinting to bury her and the truth she represented before any of the newly discovered evidence could see the light of day. The system is not broken, Ava thought, as the heavy shackles were once again clamped on her wrists. It is working exactly as it was designed to work, for them. The news hit Ethan, Leo, and Isabella like a physical blow. They had the smoking gun, Finch's journal, the true murder weapon, Samira Khan, still in hiding, had managed to securely transmit the unedited security footage from Reynolds's building. Footage that clearly showed Captain Thorne entering and exiting the penthouse within the time frame of the murder, directly contradicting his sworn alibi. They had everything they needed, but time was their most formidable enemy. Their frantic attempts to reach a sympathetic ear within the FBI, specifically Special Agent Anna Reed, the federal agent, not the incarcerated lawyer, were met with a bewildering, frustrating series of bureaucratic roadblocks. Calls weren't returned, emails went unanswered, appointments were mysteriously canceled. It seemed the Phoenix Council's tentacles reached even further than they had dared to imagine. Corrupting, or at least intimidating, elements within the federal system itself. It's like hitting a brick wall, made of red tape. Ethan fumed, his usual calm, shattered by the impending deadline. They know we have something. They're stalling, trying to run out the clock. The plan to infiltrate the Vanguard Development Gala now seemed almost laughably naive. They needed a miracle. And once again, that miracle had fur and forepaws. Rex, who had been temporarily and very reluctantly left in the care of Isabella's trusted, elderly sister, while Ethan and Leo made their perilous trip to Finch's cabin, seemed to sense the escalating urgency, the encroaching doom. In an act of sheer, inexplicable determination, the big Malinois managed to escape. He didn't just run, he moved with a chilling, almost human-like purpose. He avoided the citywide APB that Thorne had put out on him, navigating back alleys and shadowy parks as if he had an internal GPS locked onto a singular, desperate mission, while Ethan and Leo were desperately trying to find a way to get Finch's journal and the other evidence into the right hands. Before Ava's time ran out, Rex was undertaking his own, incredibly risky, operation. He made his way, not to the prison but to a discreet, unassuming law office in a quiet part of town, the office of Michael Chen, Ethan's older brother, the mechanic, who had also, in a past life, been a damn good, if somewhat disillusioned, defense attorney. Michael had quit the law years ago, disgusted by the very corruption they were now fighting, but he still had his license, and he still knew people. Rex appeared at Michael Chen's back door, covered in mud, exhausted, but with a small waterproof packet carefully clutched in his mouth. The packet contained a duplicate USB drive with all of Ava's original Project Aurora files and, astonishingly, a few key pages. Ethan had managed to quickly scan, from Finch's journal, before having to flee the cabin. How Rex had gotten this duplicate, how he knew where to take it, remained a mystery, a testament to the extraordinary bond, and perhaps the experimental K9 program that had shaped him. Michael Chen, initially stunned by the appearance of this ghost dog he'd only heard about from his brother, quickly understood the gravity of the situation. The evidence was explosive. It was enough to blow the Phoenix Council sky high, but they were running out of seconds, not minutes. As the final hours ticked down, The atmosphere outside Oakhaven State Penitentiary grew thick with a strange, palpable tension. A small but determined group of protesters, organized by Isabella Torres, and joined by Martha Mama Diaz and David Lee, both miraculously out on bail, thanks to some frantic, behind-the-scenes legal maneuvering by a few brave, young lawyers inspired by Ava's case, stood vigil, their candles flickering defiantly against the encroaching darkness. Their numbers were small, but their voices, amplified by a handful of independent journalists who had picked up on the inconsistencies of Ava's trial, were beginning to make a tiny, but noticeable, ripple in the wall of silence inside the prison. The grim preparations for Ava's execution proceeded with a chilling, mechanical efficiency. Ava was allowed a final phone call. She called Isabella Torres. "Tell Leo and Ethan and Samira." "Thank you," Ava said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Tell them they fought the good fight, and tell Rex he was the best partner a detective could ever ask for. Tell him I love him." There were no tears, just a profound, weary acceptance, or so it seemed. But Ava Ramirez was not done fighting. Not yet. As the guards came to escort her, on her final walk, she made one last, unexpected move. She looked directly into the surveillance camera, in her cell. A camera she knew was being monitored by Chief Finch, Captain Thorne, and the other architects of her demise. And she spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "Alistair Finch," she said, her eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to cut through the lens. "I know about your journal. I know about Project Aurora. I know you murdered Jonathan Reynolds to silence me. And I know that you are my father." The last part was a bluff, a desperate, wild guess, based on that one cryptic line in Finch's journal about her being just like her mother. But the way Finch had looked at her during her arrest, the almost personal venom in his eyes, had planted a seed of suspicion, a horrifying, unthinkable possibility. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. The impact was immediate. In the remote viewing room, Alistair Finch visibly recoiled, his face drained of color. For the first time, the mask of arrogant composure slipped, revealing a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. The execution was scheduled for midnight. The clock was ticking. The stage was set for the final act of a tragedy, but unknown to the Phoenix Council. The players were about to change, and the script was about to be spectacularly rewritten. The seeds of doubt Ava had sown, and the undeniable evidence Rex had delivered, were about to ignite. A firestorm, the final hour before midnight, descended upon Oakhaven State Penitentiary like a suffocating shroud. Inside the sterile, chillingly quiet execution chamber, Ava Ramirez was strapped to the gurney. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting harsh shadows on her face. She closed her eyes, not in resignation, but in a moment of profound, focused calm. She had done all she could. The rest was out of her hands, out of her. Outside the prison walls, a desperate, high-stakes ballet was unfolding. Michael Chen, armed with the explosive contents of Finch's journal and Ava's Project Aurora files, delivered so miraculously by Rex, was working the phones, calling in every favor, every long-dormant contact. From his years as a defense attorney, he knew most judges would be unreachable or unwilling to intervene at this late hour, especially against the wishes of powerful figures like Chief Finch, and by extension, Governor Bennett, who was widely known to be in Finch's pocket. But Michael wasn't aiming for the conventional routes. He was targeting a specific, recently appointed, and famously independent federal magistrate judge, known for her integrity and her intolerance for prosecutorial misconduct. Simultaneously, Special Agent Anna Reed of the FBI, the one on the outside, having finally received a heavily encrypted, anonymous data dump containing Samira Khan's unedited security footage of Thorne at the crime scene and Ethan's photographs of Finch's journal pages, a desperate last-ditch effort by Ethan, who had bypassed his compromised FBI contacts and sent it through a secure whistleblower channel, was facing her own internal battles. Her superiors were advising caution, political sensitivities, lack of verifiable chain of custody. It was clear the Phoenix Council's influence was actively working to suppress the evidence. Caution, Agent Reed had reportedly snapped back to her section chief. A woman is about to be legally murdered based on fabricated evidence, orchestrated by the chief of police. If that doesn't warrant immediate federal intervention, then what the hell does our badge even stand for? Reed made a decision. She bypassed her direct chain of command and went straight to a deputy director she knew from her academy days, a man who owed her a significant favor. It was a career-ending gamble, but Ava's life hung in the balance. And then there was Rex, the big Malinois, having delivered his precious cargo to Michael Chen, didn't rest, guided by an intelligence that defied all logical explanation. He made his way back towards Oakhaven, but he didn't try to breach the main gates. Instead, he found a storm drain, an almost forgotten, narrow conduit. That, according to ancient city blueprints Ethan had once shown him during their research into Vanguard's land grabs, ran partially beneath the older sections of the prison complex. It was a disgusting, rat-infested tunnel, barely large enough for him to squeeze through. But Rex pressed on, driven by a primal, unwavering loyalty. Inside the prison, as the minutes ticked relentlessly down, Warden David Stern was facing the crisis of his professional life. The young correctional officer, Willow Hayes, pale but resolute, had managed to slip him the USB drive containing the security footage of Thorne at Reynolds' penthouse. Warden Stern, a man who had always prided himself on running a tight, orderly ship, watched the footage. His face grew grimmer with each passing second. He had seen corruption before. But this was something else entirely. This was a rot that went to the very core. He immediately called Captain Thorne, who was present in the prison's command center, ostensibly to oversee the execution. "Captain," Stern's voice was dangerously calm, "I have some questions about your whereabouts on the night of the Reynolds murder, questions that this footage seems to answer rather definitively." Thorne, initially dismissive, blustered, "Warden, this is hardly the time." But when Stern described exactly what the footage showed, Thorne's voice faltered, panic flickered in his eyes. He knew the carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. With less than 10 minutes to midnight, Warden Stern made the call. "Stop the preparations," he ordered the execution team. His voice, though strained, carried the weight of command. "There are irregularities that need to be addressed. The execution is on hold, pending clarification." The execution chamber plunged into a stunned, confused silence. The medical technician, his hand hovering over the first syringe, froze. Captain Thorne, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, stormed towards the warden. "Stern, you have no authority to do this. The governor's warrant is absolute. Proceed with the execution, or you will answer directly to Chief Finch and the governor himself." "I answer to the law, Captain Thorne," Warden Stern retorted, his voice like ice. "And right now, the law seems to have some serious questions for you." It was at that precise moment that two things happened, almost simultaneously. First, the main gates of Oakhaven were breached, not by force, but by the arrival of a convoy of black FBI sedans, their sirens wailing, lights flashing, Special Agent Anna Reed, flanked by a team of heavily armed federal agents, strode into the prison's reception area, waving a freshly signed, emergency federal injunction, temporarily halting Ava Ramirez's execution, citing credible evidence of systemic constitutional violations and obstruction of justice by senior members of the New Havenwood Police Department. The deputy director had come through. Second, from deep within the prison's ventilation system, a series of muffled barks and scratching sounds began to emanate, growing louder, closer. Then, with a final, desperate scrabble, a section of an air vent, directly above Warden Stern's administrative office, where Chief Finch and D.A. Sterling were nervously monitoring the situation via closed-circuit TV, gave way, and down dropped, covered in filth. But Weba, wagging triumphantly, Rex, in his mouth. He carried, not a weapon, but another small, waterproof packet. This one contained the actual, physical pages Ethan had photographed from Finch's journal, and, miraculously, the small leather-bound journal itself, which Rex must have somehow retrieved, from where Ethan had been forced to hastily conceal it, near Finch's cabin, after being nearly discovered. Rex trotted directly to Warden Stern, who looked utterly dumbfounded, dropped the packet at his feet, and then let out a single, loud, clear bark. It wasn't a bark of aggression. It was a bark of announcement, a bark of justice, delivered. The game was over. The Phoenix Council had been checkmated by a condemned detective, a handful of ordinary, courageous citizens, a maverick FBI agent, a conflicted warden, and one truly extraordinary dog. The execution of Ava Ramirez was not just on hold. It was, effectively, dead. And the hunt for the real killers and the architects of a vast conspiracy was about to begin, in earnest. The scene in Warden Stern's administrative office, moments after Rex's dramatic and, frankly, unbelievable entrance through the air vent, was one of controlled chaos. Chief Alistair Finch and District Attorney Victor Sterling, who had been arrogantly observing what they believed were Ava Ramirez's final moments, now found themselves trapped. Their faces, which moments before had held expressions of grim satisfaction, were now masks of stunned disbelief and dawning, sickening horror. Special Agent Anna Reed, flanked by two imposing FBI agents, had already secured the office. Her federal injunction, waved in Finch's apoplectic face, had effectively stripped him of any authority within the prison walls, at least for now. Chief Finch, Mr. Sterling, Agent Reed stated, her voice calm, but with an underlying edge of steel. You are both being detained for questioning in connection with a federal investigation into obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and multiple civil rights violations. Finch, a man accustomed to unquestioned power, sputtered. This is an outrage. On what grounds? This is a state matter. You have no jurisdiction here. Agent Reed simply gestured towards the filthy, yet triumphant, Rex, who was now sitting patiently by Warden Stern's desk, where the packet containing Finch's journal lay like a ticking time bomb. I believe Warden Stern has some rather compelling, new evidence that elevates this far beyond a simple state matter, Chief. Warden Stern, still slightly dazed by the canine delivery service, but his resolve now solidified by the federal presence, picked up the journal. Its leather cover was smeared with grime, but its contents were pure dynamite. He opened it to a page Ethan had bookmarked, a page detailing the explicit plan to frame Ava Ramirez for the murder of Jonathan Reynolds. Chief Finch, Stern said, his voice heavy with disgust. Is this your handwriting? Finch's eyes darted around the room, like a cornered rat. He saw the armed federal agents, the determined look on Reed's face, the damning journal in Stern's hands, and Rex, that blasted dog, watching him with an almost knowing intelligence. The arrogance, the bluster, drained away, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man, the permanent solution. The Phoenix Council had so meticulously planned for Ava Ramirez had just backfired, spectacularly. News of the halted execution and the dramatic events unfolding at Oakhaven spread like wildfire. The handful of protesters outside the prison gates, led by the indomitable Isabella Torres, Martha Mama Diaz, and David Lee, had swelled as independent media outlets and citizen journalists, alerted by Michael Chen's network and Ethan's desperate data dumps, began to arrive. Their candles no longer flickered with just hope, but with the first bright flames of outrage and a demand for accountability. Inside the execution chamber, Ava Ramirez was carefully, almost reverently, unstrapped from the gurney. The medical technician, who had been moments away from administering the lethal drugs, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and profound relief. I don't know what just happened out there, Detective," he stammered, "but someone, or something, was definitely looking out for you." Ava, still weak, but her eyes shining with a fierce, unyielding light, simply nodded. She knew. The hours that followed were a blur of legal wrangling and strategic maneuvering. Michael Chen, working in tandem with Agent Reed, presented the irrefutable evidence: Finch's journal, the unedited security footage of Thorne, Ava's meticulously compiled Project Aurora files, the audio recordings of Phoenix Council members, and the sworn affidavits from Isabella Torres and the other victims Ava had identified in prison, like Mama Diaz and David Lee, who were now being hailed as crucial witnesses. The Phoenix Council's carefully constructed wall of silence and intimidation began to crumble. Lower-level members, seeing the writing on the wall and facing the prospect of serious federal charges, began to flip, offering testimony in exchange for deals. The network of corruption that had held New Havenwood in its grip for so long was being systematically and rapidly dismantled. Captain Marcus Thorne, when confronted with the video evidence of his presence at Reynolds's penthouse and the discovery of the true murder weapon, which Ethan and Leo, guided by Finch's journal, had managed to locate, hidden in a secret compartment in Thorne's fishing boat, tried to bluster his way out. He claimed he was at the penthouse, on unofficial business, conducting his own investigation, but his story fell apart under Agent Reed's relentless, laser-focused questioning. His deeply ingrained racism and personal vendetta against Ava became painfully apparent. District Attorney Victor Sterling, the man who had so zealously prosecuted Ava, now found himself on the other side of the interrogation table. His attempts to claim prosecutorial immunity were quickly dismissed when evidence surfaced of him actively suppressing exculpatory evidence that would have cleared Ava, and directly implicating him in the cover-up. Judge Harold Crane, implicated by Finch's journal and the testimony of several cooperating witnesses, as a key facilitator of the Phoenix Council's judicial manipulations, tried to use his position on the bench as a shield. But the Judicial Conduct Committee, spurred by the public outcry and the overwhelming evidence, initiated impeachment proceedings. His reign of biased justice was over. The powerful interests, Arthur Finchley, Ava's first disastrous public defender, had alluded to, were now exposed. Their names splashed across headlines, their carefully cultivated images shattered. The Vanguard Development Corporation, the public face of Project Aurora, declared bankruptcy almost overnight, as its illegal activities and ties to the Phoenix Council were laid bare. Its executives faced a barrage of lawsuits and criminal investigations. And Alistair Finch, the puppet master, the man who had orchestrated it all, the man who had tried to murder his own detective, a detective who, in a cruel twist of fate he had desperately tried to bury, was also his own daughter. Finch found himself, utterly and completely, alone. His empire, built on lies, corruption, and racial animosity, had imploded. The journal, his arrogant chronicle of power, had become his epitaph. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in a hurricane, Ethan Chen would later describe it. For so long, they seemed untouchable, invincible, but it turns out, even the most powerful, most arrogant of empires can be brought down by the truth. Especially when that truth has a very determined, very intelligent, four-legged ally. Ava Ramirez was not just freed from death row, she was, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, truly free. As she walked out of Oakhaven State Penitentiary, not as a condemned prisoner, but as a symbol of resilience and a testament to the enduring power of justice, she was met, not by a phalanx of guards, but by the tearful, joyful embrace of Isabella Torres, Leo Maxwell, Ethan Chen, Samira Khan, who had come out of hiding, and Michael Chen. And there, at the front of the small crowd, his tail thumping a triumphant rhythm against the pavement, was Rex. Ava knelt and buried her face in his thick fur. The sobs that had been locked away for so long finally came. Tears of grief for what she had endured, tears of anger for the injustice, tears of gratitude for the incredible, unwavering loyalty of her friends and her magnificent K9 partner. The light at the end of the tunnel, Ava whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Sometimes, it's not a train. Sometimes, it's the unwavering beam of truth and the wagging tail of a very, very good boy. The nightmare was over, but the fight to rebuild and to ensure such a travesty of justice could never happen again was just beginning. The months that followed Ava Ramirez's dramatic 11th hour exoneration were a whirlwind. The federal investigation into the Phoenix Council and Project Aurora expanded exponentially, pulling back the curtain on a level of systemic corruption and racially motivated exploitation that shocked even the most jaded observers. It wasn't just New Havenwood. The council's tentacles had begun to creep into neighboring counties, a malignant growth, feeding off greed and prejudice. Agent Anna Reed, now heading a dedicated task force, worked tirelessly alongside Ava, who, despite her ordeal, insisted on contributing her intimate knowledge of the case and her sharp detective skills. Rex, of course, was an unofficial, but invaluable, member of the team, his uncanny ability to sense deception or locate hidden evidence, proving crucial on more than one occasion. The trials, when they came, were lengthy and highly publicized. Chief Alistair Finch, the architect of the conspiracy, faced a mountain of evidence. His journal became a national sensation, dubbed the Finch Confessions by the media, its chillingly detached entries laying bare his calculated cruelty, his deep-seated racism, and his shocking, personal connection to Ava became required reading for anyone trying to understand the insidious nature of power, corrupted, his defense, that he was a victim of a political witch hunt, that his journal was merely creative writing, collapsed under the weight of corroborating testimony from dozens of former associates, now scrambling to save their own skins. Finch was found guilty on multiple federal charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, a broken man, his legacy forever tarnished, the revelation that Ava was his unacknowledged daughter, whom he had actively tried to destroy. Rather than risk exposure, added a layer of Shakespearean tragedy and personal depravity to his downfall. That resonated deeply with a horrified public. Captain Marcus Thorne, the brutal enforcer, whose personal vendetta against Ava had fueled so much of the initial frame-up, tried to maintain his arrogant defiance throughout his trial. But the unedited security footage of him at Reynolds' penthouse, combined with the discovery of the true murder weapon in his possession, and the testimony of officers he had bullied into falsifying reports, sealed his fate. He, too, received a lengthy prison sentence, his career in law enforcement ending in utter disgrace. District Attorney Victor Sterling and Judge Harold Crane, the legal pillars of the Phoenix Council, faced their own reckonings. Sterling was convicted of suborning perjury and obstruction. His once promising political ambitions reduced to ashes. Judge Crane was impeached and disbarred, his name becoming synonymous with judicial corruption, the legal system, which they had so expertly manipulated for their own nefarious purposes, finally turned its gears against them. Dozens of other individuals, police officers, city officials, businessmen, lawyers, all cogs in the Phoenix Council's machine, faced charges ranging from bribery to perjury to civil rights violations. Some received prison time, others lost their careers, their reputations, their ill-gotten gains. The house of cards Finch had so carefully constructed had not just collapsed, it had been obliterated. But the most fascinating, and perhaps most perplexing, part of the fallout centered around Rex. His extraordinary abilities, his seemingly preternatural intelligence, could no longer be dismissed as mere good training or canine instinct. The FBI, intrigued and slightly unnerved, delved into the history of the New Havenwood Police Department's K-9 unit, and there, buried in old classified files, they found it. Details of an experimental and highly controversial K-9 cognitive enhancement program, conducted nearly a decade earlier. The program aimed to use a combination of advanced training techniques, neurostimulation, and even some unverified genetic biofeedback protocols to try and unlock higher levels of canine intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. Most of the canine subjects had either failed to show significant improvement or had developed unpredictable, aggressive tendencies. The program was deemed a failure and officially shut down. Its records, largely forgotten. Rex, it turned out, was one of the very few successes of that program. Or rather, he was an outlier, an unexpected result. His intelligence hadn't just been enhanced, it had evolved. He wasn't just following commands, he was, in many ways, reasoning, strategizing, understanding complex emotional cues, and demonstrating a capacity for abstract thought, far beyond what was considered possible. For a dog, Ava had known Rex was special, but even she hadn't fully grasped the extent of his unique, and perhaps scientifically revolutionary, cognitive abilities. The revelation sparked a firestorm of debate in both scientific and ethical circles about the limits of animal intelligence and the responsibilities that come with such advanced and potentially weaponized capabilities. Rex became a reluctant celebrity, a four-legged enigma studied by scientists and adored by a public hungry for heroes. For Ava, the path to healing was long and arduous. The city of New Havenwood, facing a barrage of lawsuits, offered her a substantial financial settlement and a full public apology. The charges against her were not just dropped, they were expunged with extreme prejudice. Her record was wiped clean, as if the nightmare had never happened. The other victims of the Phoenix Council, like Martha Mama Diaz, David Lee, and Linda Carter, also received justice. Their bogus convictions were overturned, their names cleared, and they received compensation for their suffering. Anna Reed, the incarcerated lawyer, whose case had been a precursor to Ava's, was granted a new trial based on the evidence of Vanguard's corrupt tactics and was quickly exonerated. She emerged from prison a powerful voice for the wrongly accused, but the scars remained. Ava could never truly go back to being the detective she once was. The system she had believed in had betrayed her in the most profound way imaginable, yet she refused to let bitterness consume her. "The darkness nearly swallowed me whole," she told a reporter in a rare interview. "But what I learned in that darkness is that even the smallest light can make a difference, and that light often comes from the courage of ordinary people and the unwavering loyalty of extraordinary friends, both two-legged and four." The question now was, what would Ava Ramirez and her remarkable partner, Rex, do next? The city wanted her back on the force, a symbol of reform, a beacon of hope. But Ava had other plans. The fight had changed her. The stakes were now much, much higher than just closing cases. They were about changing the very system that had tried to destroy her. And she knew, with Rex by her side, they were just getting started. The ashes of the Phoenix Council had barely settled before Ava Ramirez began to chart her new course. The city of New Havenwood, in a desperate attempt to repair its shattered image, offered her reinstatement, a promotion, even the possibility of leading a new internal affairs task force designed to root out corruption. It was a tempting offer, a chance to reclaim her career, her reputation, from within the system she knew so well. But Ava had walked through fire and emerged, fundamentally changed. The thought of returning to the same department, walking the same hallways, where colleagues had turned a blind eye or actively participated in her persecution, felt untenable. Instead, with a significant portion of her financial settlement and the unwavering support of her allies, Ava established the Ramirez-Rex Legacy Foundation for True Justice. It wasn't just a catchy name, it was a mission statement. The foundation's primary goal was to provide top-tier legal representation and investigative support for individuals believed to be wrongly convicted, with a special focus on cases involving systemic racial bias, police misconduct, and prosecutorial overreach. Cases just like hers. "I can't fix what happened to me," Ava stated at the Foundation's inaugural press conference, Rex sitting calmly and majestically by her side. "But I can, and I will, dedicate my life to ensuring it doesn't happen to anyone else. The system needs more than just reform. It needs a conscience. It needs relentless advocates who are not afraid to challenge power, even when it seems insurmountable." Rex became the Foundation's beloved and highly effective ambassador. His presence at community events, fundraisers, and even, occasionally, in courtrooms with special permission, was a powerful symbol of loyalty, intelligence, and the fight for the underdog. Children adored him. Victims found solace in his calm demeanor, and even hardened cynics couldn't help but be moved by his incredible story. His unique cognitive abilities, though still not fully understood, were sometimes employed under strict ethical guidelines and with Ava's constant supervision to help investigators identify subtle cues or locate overlooked evidence in complex cold cases. He wasn't just a mascot, he was an active and often game-changing participant in the pursuit of justice. The changes in New Havenwood were slow but tangible, spurred by the public outcry and the continued scrutiny from Ava's Foundation and other civil rights organizations. The City Council implemented sweeping reforms. A civilian oversight board, with real subpoena power, was established to monitor the police department. Body camera footage became mandatory, and policies regarding use of force and racial profiling were overhauled. Project Aurora's targeted neighborhoods, which had been on the brink of devastation, became the focus of genuine, community-led revitalization efforts, with safeguards put in place to prevent predatory development and ensure long-term residents benefited from the improvements. Mama Diaz, David Lee, and Linda Carter became key leaders in these community initiatives, their voices, once silenced by injustice, now amplified by their hard-won vindication. Ethan Chen continued his work in cybercrimes, but he also volunteered countless hours as the Ramirez Rex Foundation's chief technology officer, developing innovative tools to analyze evidence and uncover digital trails of misconduct. Leo Maxwell quit his job at Animal Control and joined the foundation full-time, heading up their outreach program, connecting with families of the incarcerated, and, naturally, overseeing a small, but growing, network of justice dogs, rescue animals, trained to provide comfort and support to those affected by the criminal justice system. Isabella Torres became the Foundation's beloved matriarch, a constant source of wisdom, home-cooked meals, and unwavering moral support. Samira Khan, after testifying against her former colleagues, decided against returning to policing. Instead, she went to law school, inspired by Ava and Anna Reed, the exonerated lawyer, determined to fight for justice. From the other side of the courtroom, Chief Alistair Finch languished in federal prison, his appeals exhausted, his legacy, one of infamy, the revelation of his paternity, and his cold-blooded attempt to eliminate his own daughter, to protect his corrupt empire, served as a chilling case study in the depths of human depravity and the toxic intersection of power, prejudice, and personal ambition. He became a pariah, even among other inmates, a fallen king in a kingdom of his own making. Ava Ramirez never sought the spotlight, but she couldn't avoid it entirely. She became a reluctant icon, a symbol of hope for the hopeless. She traveled the country, sharing her story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a call to action. She spoke, with a quiet eloquence, about the fragility of justice, the insidious nature of systemic racism, and the critical importance of vigilance, transparency, and accountability. In all institutions of power, the darkness is always there, she would often say, her hand resting on Rex's head. It lurks in the shadows of our courthouses, our police stations, our city halls. It feeds on apathy, on fear, on silence. But we are the light. Every voice raised against injustice, every act of courage, every demand for truth, pushes that darkness back. It's not easy. It's not always popular. But it is essential. And Rex, her magnificent, enigmatic, canine partner, would look up at her, his intelligent eyes, reflecting a profound understanding, a shared journey. He was more than just a dog. He was a testament to the extraordinary bonds that can be forged in the crucible of adversity. He was a reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the most powerful voice for justice doesn't speak a word. It simply stands by your side, unwavering, loyal, until the very end. The story of Ava Ramirez and Rex became a legend in New Havenwood and beyond, a story whispered in hushed tones, in law schools and police academies, a story told around family dinner tables and in community centers, a story of how one detective and one extraordinary dog dared to confront a corrupt system, and in doing so, not only saved themselves, but ignited a movement, a story that served as a permanent, indelible reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, truth, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of justice can and will prevail, and that sometimes the loudest bark for righteousness comes from the heart of a silent, four-legged warrior who simply refused to let the darkness win. Have you ever witnessed an injustice in your own community? Ava would ask her audiences, her gaze sweeping across their faces. Have you ever felt powerless to make a difference? Remember this: you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Find your pack, find your Rex, and never, ever stop fighting for what is right. And as she spoke those words, Rex would often let out a soft, contented sigh, as if to say, "She's right, you know." The fight was indeed far from over, but with champions like Ava Ramirez and her incredible partner, Rex, leading the charge, there was always hope. And that, my friends, is the incredible, almost unbelievable story of Ava Ramirez and her canine partner, Rex. A story that proves, even when the entire system seems designed to crush you, truth, courage, and a little bit of four-legged, extraordinary intelligence can bring an empire of lies crumbling to the ground. It's a stark reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing. It's happening right now, in communities just like yours. Perhaps you've seen it. Perhaps you've even felt its sting. If this story of resilience, of an unbreakable bond, and the relentless pursuit of truth has moved you, if it's made you think, made you question, or even made you a little angry at the injustices that still exist, then please consider this. Stories like these need to be heard. They need to be shared, because awareness is the first step towards change. So, if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell too, because we have so many more powerful, eye-opening stories coming your way. Stories that expose the darkness, but also celebrate the light that can be found even in the most desperate of times. And as you go about your day, remember Ava and Rex. Remember the courage of those who stood with them, and ask yourself what you would do. And always remember, the most dangerous lie is the one you tell yourself when you choose to look away. Because sometimes the system isn't just broken, it's been meticulously designed to protect the very monsters it claims to hunt.